Hey guys, welcome back to another Gaming Memories video. Here we are taking a look at a collection of games by the name of All-Star Action that was actually released back in 2003 on the PS1. This was a collection of games that would have been released towards the end of the PlayStation's life cycle. Now it's actually developed by a company by the name of PSX Games that were known and mainly focused on creating like budget friendly style games, more of kind of like independent developers because they were a small company. The game actually has a load of multiple different game modes. They tried to compact like loads of different game styles all into the one type of game. The game is actually spanned across 2 discs because there's that much content in it. The one thing to note straight away is that a lot of the games that are available are pretty much all the same. All they are really is different game modes that you would normally get in a single game, but it's broken up into separate games, which is kind of like a weird kind of thing to do. But I think what they tried to do is they wanted to make sure that they tried to provide as much value as possible, but in doing so the game seriously lacked a lot of quality in a lot of areas. Even though it had a lot of quirks and it had potential, but in a lot of ways it was let down because they focused more on quantity rather than actual quality. The likes of these first game modes I'm showing here, like where you're doing like surfboarding and jet skiing and so forth, primarily it's the same thing over and over again. I actually haven't played this myself. It was kind of hard to figure out actually what to do. It's the control scheme it is kind of difficult to pick up, and there's not really much to it in this mode. All you're trying to do is just kind of like get on top of the waves and try to hold out as long as you can without falling off, and just try to get like a percentage like score based on the amount of air time that you actually get. But other than that, there's not much to it. It's more like a sample demo rather than an actual game, which doesn't really you get bored of it very, very quickly. But here you move on, the game then does go on into kind of like a futuristic kind of mech racing style game where you're actually racing on tracks in a futuristic kind of environment using like mech kind of droid machines. Almost very similar to the likes of Wipeout, if you're familiar with that. The only difference is you've got like robots rather than actual hovercrafts. Now this game in itself was definitely very different compared to the previous games that were also available on the disc. It actually looks decent graphically. It actually looks okay, and it plays and handles quite well. But again, like the other games before it, even though visually it is more aesthetically very good, it does get a bit repetitive because the games don't really seem to kind of like end. Like there's not really so much in terms of like laps. You just have to keep racing literally until the timer runs out, and whoever pretty much has the most points at the end pretty much wins. So there's no overall like lap times involved in the races. So you have multiple different modes. There's anything between like surfboarding all the way even up to bikes and truck racing and cars. So here you can see it's like GP style, like with the likes of bikes. Now this here was actually definitely one of the better kind of variants within the game itself. Now it wouldn't be as fast as other bike games, but the handling was actually not too bad. It was actually quite decent. When you got the hang of it, it's actually one of the better qualities of the game. The one thing though with a lot of these racing style games, because they try to break it up into separate games, there's a lot of limitations on the likes of the content that's available within them. Like you might get a handful of a couple of different bikes, or even in terms of the cars or trucks that you're racing, but the problem you have with them is that you've only got access to 2 tracks on each one, which is definitely a letdown. And in some of the games you're just racing on the same variation of track that you would have raced on some of the other games. Technically, if it had a Grand Prix mode, it would have actually been a lot better if you actually had to have some sort of consistency within the game and have like different modes rather than try to separate them into different games. You could have like different modes, like what a lot of racing games do now today. Like even if you played like any games like the dirt racing series, on the PlayStation, on modern consoles, they do break that up, and it's executed very well, where they have different game modes with different kind of vehicles, and they have different tracks associated with it. So I suppose this was kind of like an early kind of attempt at doing something like that, but instead of making it into separate game modes, they tried to make it into separate games, but again they just lacked certain kind of things, like say the amount of tracks and so forth, which is a pity, because like with the racing modes, even though right they're not as polished as some other games, it had potential, but again, like I mentioned at the start of the video, the developers focused more on quantity rather than quality, and as a result it actually did let the game down. The other thing as well is the developers also created other games similar to this. They done All-Star Action, but they also done All-Star Racing 1 and All-Star Racing 2, and I think 5-Star Racing. And again, they just pretty much just ripped the items and tracks and so forth from pretty much this game here, or vice versa, and just literally put them into the other games. So they're just reusing stuff. So if you've pretty much played one, you've actually played them all, unfortunately. So it just feels like that the game was actually more of a cash grab rather than an actual full-on game, which is actually a pity, because there is some elements here that actually could have actually been really good, had more thought and more time been put into it. And if they had actually developed it more as like an entire kind of game, instead of even like having like the water sports element, even just focus on the actual racing, because the racing segments are the best part of the game, even though it wouldn't be as well polished compared to like a lot of other mainstream and higher quality games out there. It's definitely decent enough to play for, even for a few minutes. If you want to play like a couple of casual games, by all means have a look at it, and even just to see what these type of games are like, and just to kind of see the differences between games of like say a budget friendly game compared to a more higher end game. You can definitely see the differences. I like to do that. I like to kind of have a look at these different types of games and compare them and see what's good about them or what's not so good. But even with games like this here that would be low quality, they do actually have some elements in it that are actually okay and that are actually good, and they could have been made better had actually more time been put into it, which is a pity, but unfortunately that's just the way some of these games go, and unfortunately it still actually happens today. There's some games out there with some fantastic ideas, but they're just let down because they're not executed well enough, and so much is the case here. But definitely, if you ever get a chance to have a look at it, and if you are into playing something different, and you want to even just experience something different, even if it's just for a casual game, have a look at it and see what you think. But I'd love to know your thoughts on this game, and if you played it, what did you actually think of it? Did you enjoy it, or maybe not? Be sure to share it in the comments below. So if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like. Also be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be updated whenever I release future content, and also make sure to share the video, as I am going to be exploring a lot more of these quirky style and unusual style games that were released on the PlayStation back in the day, and share my thoughts and opinions with everybody. So as always, make sure to keep playing those classic games and enjoying them, and keep those gaming memories alive.